Hey guys, it's the Faceless Beanie and welcome to my Xaku guide. In this video, I'll go over Xaku's abilities, some synergies, as well as a build. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Xaku's passive, which provides a 25% chance to avoid incoming enemy weapon attacks, while also providing a 25% damage reduction against area of effect damage. Their first ability, Xata's Whisper, empowers all equipped weapons to deal a certain percentage of total weapon damage after all mods as void damage. This damage is by way of an extra shot, so it won't replace any existing status effects you've modded for. The void damage dealt can of course proc void damage's status effect, Bullet Attractor, which creates a small field where the target was that effectively blocks enemy bullets from passing through. The affected enemy will also have their own projectiles redirected, dealing self-damage. To make the most of this, you'll want to use a weapon that has a relatively high status chance. For Xata's Whisper, damage bonus is affected by ability strength and duration is affected by ability duration. Moving on to Grasp of Loc. Activating this ability will permanently disarm enemies within a certain radius from Xaku, forcing them to use melee attacks. The stolen weapons will transform into void replicas and float next to Xaku, dealing damage to enemies. If there are no armed enemies, a replica of your primary weapon will be used instead. The stolen weapons will deal void damage that scales according to the level of the enemy, and there's a cap on maximum stolen weapons used simultaneously. So if you're under this cap, you can recast the ability to steal more weapons. Each specific weapon stolen will have its own corresponding ability duration, so you can't refresh the timer for weapons stolen earlier. If you're at the maximum amount of stolen weapons, you can't recast. Grasp of Loc also has a chance to stagger certain enemies. Damage is affected by ability strength, duration is affected by ability duration, and grab and target range along with the maximum stolen weapons cap are affected by ability range. Moving on to the third ability, the Lost. Tapping this ability will cycle between its three sub-abilities, while holding it will cast one of them. Let's go through each one. Accuse allows Xaku to turn a number of enemies within a certain radius into allies for a limited time. They'll be stunned initially but will then fight by your side until the duration runs out. Similar to Grasp of Loc, there's a max target cap, so if you're under that, you can recast, but each new accused ally has their own ability duration. Max targets are affected by ability strength, radius is affected by ability range, and duration is affected by ability duration. Next up, it's Gaze. Gaze entangles the target in place, rendering it immobile and invulnerable to damage. However, while entangled, the victim will store all damage received and will be affected by all of it once the duration runs out. There can only be two simultaneously gazed targets. Do note that once enemies move out of Gaze's aura, they will regain their armor and shields. Uncasting the ability while aiming at the entangled target will release the victim and inflict all stored damage onto them. Recasting will entangle a new enemy but will set the oldest entangled enemy free, provided you have two gazed targets already. One thing to note is that gazed targets are still affected by status effects. Range and aura radius are affected by ability range, while duration is affected by ability duration. Shield and armor reduction, as mentioned, are affected by ability strength. A 100% decrease requires 200% ability strength. And the last one is Deny. Deny unleashes a void beam that deals void damage to enemies struck directly and stuns enemies in mid-air for a limited time. This can be recast while active to strike new enemies or just refresh the ability on all existing targets. Range is affected by ability range, while damage is affected by ability strength, the number of Grasp of Loc replicas, and the Vast Untime's void damage vulnerability. Finally, the ultimate, the Vast Untime. Xaku detonates themselves and exposes their skeletal form for a limited time or until the ability is deactivated. While in their skeletal form, Xaku's passive is buffed to have a 75% dodge chance and area of effect damage reduction, as well as buffs their movement speed by 20%. When activated, the ability deals void damage to nearby enemies within direct line of sight, and these enemies also suffer 50% void damage vulnerability and reduced action speeds. Any destructible objects within the blast radius will also be destroyed. Most importantly, however, the Vast Untime freezes the duration timers of all other active abilities. Their timers won't start ticking down until the Vast Untime is deactivated. You can recast these abilities at any time as well. Damage and slowdown are affected by ability strength, range is affected by ability range, and duration is affected by ability duration. Let's get into some synergies. Play around with the Lost. You can cast Gaze on an enemy and then move close to it and trigger Grasp of Look to disarm enemies and start damaging them with the replicas while stripped of their armor. You could also cast Accuse on a group of enemies to have your own personal squad, then use Grasp of Look to disarm other enemies and steal their weapons with your allies fighting by your side. Cast Grasp of Look to disarm enemies, then deny to deal the most damage possible from its Void Beam. Any enemies not killed will be stunned in midair, so Grasp of Look's replicas will dispose of them quickly. Cast the Vast Untime with your other abilities up to lengthen their duration. Theoretically, they can be active forever as long as you keep recasting the Vast Untime. Zata's Whisper is a strict damage buff, so there's no reason not to have it on at all times. The Bullet Attractor effect is just an added bonus. Finally, any damage dealt as a result of Zata's Whisper is further amplified by the Vast Untime's Void Vulnerability buff. The same goes for Grasp of Look's replicas. Moving on to the build. It's a hefty 6 Forma simply because I refused to use my Umbra Forma. The goal was to get as much range as possible with at least 200% ability strength for Gaze's armor stripping. I had to choose between duration and efficiency, so since I went with the former, flow is in there to balance out any energy issues. The arcanes are optional but recommended. If you just want to test Xaku before investing so much Forma, a 0 Forma build looks something like this, with a bit of everything so you can freely test out the abilities in-game before committing. So, Xaku is useful in almost any mission, whether you're doing it solo or in a team. The armor strip paired with the Grasp of Look firepower can make light work of steel path enemies. In defense missions, Xaku can cast Gaze on a target close to the defense objective, then trigger Grasp of Look to quickly take out enemies around the objective. Survival and exterminate missions become trivial in the same way. Gaze can also be used to temporarily freeze acolytes or certain bosses, and remember that all damage dealt is stored and received by them once Gaze runs out. Deny, on the other hand, can suspend Kuva Liches and Demolists in the air. Xaku's Void damage will reset sentient resistances, but you can't destroy Eidolon shields with it, nor cycle through Profitaker's elemental resistances. Finally, with some range, the Vast Untime will destroy all containers in a room when casted, and this can be a great way to farm rare resources like neural sensors or argon crystals. Hope this helped you out. This is the Faceless Beanie, signing out.